If you are into longevity, you have probably heard about NMN and NR, two famous molecules that boost NAD levels. I've been taking NMN for several years already, but I'm always on the hunt for the latest progress in science. And it turns out there might be a better approach to boosting NAD. To explain you all about it in great detail, I have the absolute pleasure to bring you Nichola Conlon, PhD, a molecular biologist specializing in the study of cellular aging. After a career in drug development with a leading biotech firm, Dr. Nichola founded Nucido Laboratories, driven by her belief that cutting-edge science should not lie hidden. Just like us at Beyond Sapiens, she is on a mission to democratize science, helping people to reverse their biological age and improve their health span. So without further ado, here's Dr. Nichola. So Dr. Nichola Conlon, thank you so much for being here with us today. I'm really grateful for your time and super excited to pick your brain for the next 30 minutes, hopefully not longer, when it comes to everything related to NAD, its link to longevity, and how we can boost it. In reality, I would like to start this conversation with, hey, should we take NMN, NR, or what else? Do they work? But I know that biology is a very complicated topic. And so I would like to ask you if you could help us take a maybe step back and understand what NAD is and why do we need it.
Yeah, I mean, I always talk about NAD being probably one of the most important molecules that people just aren't aware of. And that's because if we didn't have any NAD in our cells, we'd literally be dead in 30 seconds because it's so fundamental to our biology and to keeping our cells functioning. So first thing is NAD stands for nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide. That's a number one question that I get asked, but it's a bit of a mouthful. So that's why it's generally abbreviated to NAD. And it's a natural molecule. It's found in every single one of our cells. And it's involved in hundreds of processes, but I guess it's famous for two. The first thing that it's famous for is for energy production. So NAD forms a critical part of the reaction in our mitochondria, which are the energy powerhouses of our cells, to help form ATP, which is the energy currency of the cell. It's the energy format that all of our cells and all of our bodily processes need to function. And without NAD, you literally cannot create cellular energy. So that is why we'd be dead in 30 seconds if we didn't have it. The second thing that it's really important for is for cellular maintenance and repair. So NAD almost acts as a switch to turn repair on and off. So in general terms, if you have high levels of NAD, you will be getting lots of efficient energy production, and you will also be getting good levels of repair and maintenance in the cells. But if NAD declines, then you will see energy production go down and repair will also go down.
Yeah, and talking about decline, we know that unfortunately, as we age, we start losing NAD levels about 50% per 20 years. And so obviously, that is not a great news. But of course, I think that my question here is, how is NAD connected to longevity and this decline of NAD?
Yeah, so it isn't great news to know that it declines so much because that stat is actually from birth. So even by the time you're 20, you've lost half your NAD. Then that amount of NAD is then halved again by the time you're 40. So you can kind of do the maths, and it's quite scary to think that, you know, by the time we're reaching more advanced stages, we really don't have very much of this critical NAD molecule left at all. And the reason that's a problem is because if you've got low NAD, energy production's going down. So this is why older people generally feel, you know, like they just don't have the energy or the stamina that they used to. And that's both physical and mental energy, you know, as opposed to where you see children running around and you say, well, how have they got so much energy? That's their NAD. They've got high NAD. The other thing is damage gets, you know, goes up because as our NAD levels go down, repair gets switched off, damage accumulates, and we start to notice a lot of the signs and symptoms associated with the aging process be correlated to this NAD decline. So I think it's the reason we're so interested in it in terms of the longevity field and for aging is because scientists said, okay, so if we've got this really important molecule that's keeping our cells in good health and it declines as we get older and it causes all these problems, then why don't we just not let it decline? Why don't we, top levels back up, or alternatively just don't let it decline in the first place. So this was a lot of experiments that were done to kind of have a look at what happened if you could maintain your NAD levels. And it was found by topping up NAD or maintaining it, it had a huge host of benefits, not only in terms of at the cellular level, in terms of energy production, repair, autophagy, things like that. It also had major benefits to the whole health of the either the cells or the animal or the person that it was being tested in. It's being tested in all now. And this was in terms of overall increased what we would call health span. So this is, the proportion of your life that you live in good health, free from chronic age-related illness or disease. So it was extending this portion of healthy lifespan. So scientists were very excited at finding ways to maybe try and boost NAD levels and reap the benefits.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And I remember like before being 30, like maybe in my 20s, I remember people from their 30s or 40s, they're like, well, once you hit 30, like you start feeling something changes. Yeah. And now like knowing more about this, it's like, well, maybe that's also linked. It might be linked to many things, but also to the NAD piece. That makes total sense. And yeah, and it's super excited to know like all the back end that you've had in terms of knowledge, experience, and research about the topic. So that's why I'm like, I want to learn more. But before we do that, I also think it's really important to remind ourselves, like me or our viewers in general, how to naturally increase our NAD levels. Meaning, yes, we have to take for granted, unfortunately, that those NAD levels decline with age. We cannot really do much with that, except with what we're going to cover later on this video. But it is true that we can do something in the present to help our energy levels overall. And that is something that we're super passionate of at Beyond Sapiens, for example, with all of our clients, because I think mixing good lifestyle choices with molecules that together they can create the massive return on investment, for lack of better phrasing, on our health. But I would love to hear your perspective on the topic.
Yeah. So we know that NAD levels, although they do decline with age, it's also massively influenced by lifestyle. So actually, whenever I do a presentation on this topic, instead of showing a graph that just kind of goes straight down, I show a bit of a lumpy graph, like with lots of bumps in it. And this is to show that everyone's a bit different. And it does depend on lifestyle. So what we know is that if you have a sedentary lifestyle where you're not doing much exercise, if you're eating a poor, high inflammatory diet, we know that those things will deplete NAD faster than if you have a lifestyle where you are doing exercise and you are active and you are eating, a good balanced non-inflammatory diet. You are maybe doing some fasting. We know that those things actually do have a big impact on our NAD levels. If you look at people who are more unhealthy, so, people who have metabolic disease, like diabetes, who have obesity, things like that, you see they have much lower levels of NAD in their cells. So it is very lifestyle related. And this means that you can do things such as high intensity interval training and resistance training. Both of those have been shown to actually increase NAD levels naturally, and also fasting. So doing any form of fasting also boosts NAD. And the way that this works, or both exercise and fasting, is that your cells, when you are fasting or exercising, are undergoing energy stress. So this sets off almost like a little alarm in your cells saying, oh my goodness, we don't have any energy coming in and we're using energy, and we need to up our own energy production, and we also need to up repair to make sure our cells survive the period of stress. So this means that NAD production gets put up. So we've got more NAD for energy production, but also more energy, more NAD available to be able to repair any damages that's happening during exercise, for example, or during fasting. So this is why these two lifestyle factors actually influence our NAD levels.
So it's like a positive feedback loop.
Yeah.
Yeah, nice. And I think obviously if we pair that with the molecules, then it's like we get the best of both worlds. And so transitioning to the most popular molecules, I remember when I read Lifespan, I think it was 2019, and that has kind of started changing my life from, being a photographer to entrepreneur, but that's another story for another time. From that moment, I was like, well, I'm like 30-ish. I guess I should start taking NMN. And so I started taking NMN, and I know that many people did. There are many testimonials of people maybe in their 70s or 80s that are like, hey, after taking NR or NMN, I'm like so energetic and all of that. So apparently like they do work, but I want maybe you to explain to us a little bit more like how do they actually work from a, molecule and biological perspective.
So when scientists discovered that NAD was this thing that we want to boost, people set about trying to find ways to do it. The first way was, well, why don't we just put NAD in a capsule and take it? And, that hopefully that'll boost and replace our NAD levels. Now, unfortunately, it's not as simple as that. That's because NAD is a large and unstable molecule, so it doesn't survive well outside the body. It definitely doesn't get through the gut. And even if you infuse it using like IV infusions or things like that, NAD doesn't actually do much in the blood. It needs to be inside of the cells to have its effect. And a lot of cells don't have the little channels big enough to let NAD in because it is a big molecule. So scientists said, well, what else can we do? So this is where precursors came about. So these are NR, NMN. They are basically the precursor building blocks that our body uses to make NAD. And the idea behind those is that if you give the body more of the raw material that it needs to manufacture NAD, then hopefully it will actually turn this raw material into NAD and restore NAD levels. So, several years ago, this was thought of as the best way to boost NAD because it's a simple, quick, easy way, and it does show some degree of NAD boost when you take these types of molecules.
And that's why I think people are wondering, okay, I can see benefits, but the real question is, do they actually help longevity? Because I think that is, or better, like healthy aging, health span, whatever we want to name it. But like, do they actually help with that? Or they can maybe cause problems?
So there's been a lot of clinical trials now, many more for NR. NMN has some that have come out recently, but there's a lot more trials for NR especially. And there's been shown, especially in preclinical studies, so in animal and cell studies, that it has huge benefits. Boosting NAD does everything from improving metabolic function to repairing DNA damage to improving cognitive function, neurodegeneration, muscle wasting, like you name it, NAD seems to help with it. And this is in preclinical studies. Then when it's gone into human clinical trials, the results haven't been so startling, and it seems like these amazing results that they're getting in cells and animals aren't quite translating through into humans. And there's been a lot of research now into like why that may be. And one of the main reasons is that NR and NMN are simply not addressing the root causes of why NAD is actually declining in the first place. So usually when something's declining in the body, there's a reason for it. And what NR and NMN do is they don't look at what that reason is. They just go, okay, just put more raw material in and hopefully we'll get more NAD out the other end. But what we now know is a lot of studies have demonstrated that there are two main things that are going on in our body to cause NAD decline. The first is that our NAD production and recycling pathway in our cells declines with age. So what happens is that when NAD is used up, during repair and things like that, it's actually broken down into precursors. And the precursor it's broken down into is nicotinamide. Then what would usually happen in our healthy young cells is this nicotinamide would literally be scooped back up in a pathway called the salvage pathway, which recycles this precursor straight back into fresh NAD again. So it's a kind of clever pathway because it means that as NAD use goes up, there'll be more breakdown products, and this pathway gets turned up and it recycles it back into more NAD to fulfill the demand for NAD. But what we now know is that as we become older, this pathway declines. So specifically, there's an enzyme in this pathway called NAMPT. This is the enzyme that declines, and it's a rate-limiting enzyme, which basically means the level of this enzyme directly dictates how much NAD will be made. So if the levels of this enzyme go down, you'll get less NAD. And we find that levels of this enzyme do decline during aging, which means that NAD simply can't be recycled as it's being used up. And this is why you begin to get a deficit. So if you look at a precursor like NR or NMN, it's ignoring this problem. So it's kind of like if you think of a factory, if the cell is a factory, you are saying, oh my goodness, production's gone down in the factory. How do we fix it? We can see all the machines are broken, but let's ignore that and let's just ship more raw material in and hope more NAD comes out the other end. You know, that is essentially what is happening. So
Okay.
the other thing is that we now also know that that's not the only problem. The second problem is inflammation. So chronic low-grade inflammation, we all suffer from it as we get older, and we know that it causes increased expression of a protein or an enzyme called CD38 on our cells. And CD38 uses up NAD. In fact, it's a prolific NAD consumer. It uses so much and wastes it to drive further inflammation. So again, we know that we have more CD38, which is using more NAD. And again, if you think of precursors like NR or NMN, if you are boosting your NAD levels, but you're not inhibiting CD38, then it's likely that a lot of this NAD that you are increasing is actually getting used by CD38 rather than other important processes like DNA repair enzymes, which also use NAD, or the sirtuins, which are crucial longevity genes, which also use NAD. And the reason we know this is because it's been calculated that CD38 has a higher affinity for NAD than the repair processes, which basically means that if NAD is available in the cell, CD38 will grab onto it strongly and use it before any of the more beneficial processes even get a look in. So, you know, you could be thinking, oh, I'm doing this good thing, I'm using NMN or NR to boost my NAD, but if you've got high expression of CD38, that NAD is actually driving inflammation. So by not fixing the root causes, you can be actually making other things worse.
Yeah, that sounds a little bit scary because it's like I'm taking this to feel better, but I might be increasing my low-grade inflammation, which is one of the hallmarks of aging.
Yeah.
So that's really interesting, and that's actually how I came to know about your company, Nuchido. And first of all, I think your story is super inspiring in terms of you transitioning from the medical world and research in terms of developing pharmaceutical, which if you want you can talk a little bit about, to then be like, well, I actually want to make a difference today by creating something that actually helps people in the here and now. And so just for the viewers, for a little bit of context, we both, Nuchido and Beyond Sapiens, were at the same trade show in London 1 month ago, I think. And that's where I actually got to know about Nuchido, and I was like, whoa, this sounds super cool. Just because, in the longevity world, everyone is talking about NMN and NR. And I think they're not necessarily a bad thing. But I think now it has been quite a few years since we have been talking about NMN and NR. And I think, as in everything in research and science, it's time to level up to a second generation kind of NAD booster. Or in this case, I know it's not just a booster, but it does more. So with that being said, my question to you is, how does your product, Nuchido Time Plus, differ from NMN and NR?
Yeah, well, you kind of, you touched on it there about, so my background is in drug development. Before I started a supplement company, I actually, I worked developing drugs, and I was fortunate enough to work on projects that were looking at drugs, that were designed to slow cellular aging. Which is quite out there in terms of drug development. It's quite forward thinking. Um, but the things that frustrated me were there were a lot of molecules that we were testing that worked really well in drug development, but because they weren't patentable, because they were natural molecules, drugs companies simply aren't interested in giving them the research or testing that they deserve, which commercially, makes sense. Why would you put hundreds of millions into something that you can't own? But ethically, I don't, it didn't sit right with me that we were literally putting in the bin molecules that were working fantastic and putting all that money into developing something that worked half as well. So I left that world in 2017 to found Nuchido. And the whole mission was, how can we take the latest science and really develop it into products or supplements that people can take now, but equally that have good science behind them and good clinical testing. And NAD was obviously this area of research that was a right hot topic, back at that time. There was a lot of research coming out that showed the benefits of it. This is when things like NR and NMN were really just emerging. And even at that time, I was looking at NMN and NR and saying, well, it's great that there's this data, but it's also becoming very clear that they're not addressing the root causes. So, if we're going to develop a product, we want to do, the next generation of NAD supplements. We want to, bring something out that reflects the latest science. So what we did was we designed a product that not only had a precursor in it, but also had lots of different other ingredients in that were all designed to fix the root causes of NAD decline. So interestingly, a lot of people say to us, well, why have you not used NR or NMN as your precursor? Because we actually use something called nicotinamide. And the reason we use nicotinamide is because nicotinamide is actually the best precursor in terms of bioavailability, and it's the precursor that our bodies naturally use to make the largest amount of the largest proportion of NAD. So that's the reason why we use nicotinamide. It doesn't require any transporters to get in the cells. It freely diffuses across membranes, and we know it where it gets to where you want it to get to in the body. Unlike NR and NMN that do require transporters, and there's also a huge amount of debate about whether things like NR actually just get metabolized to nicotinamide and then taken up by the cells anyway. So we just sort of stayed out of that whole argument and just went straight for the nicotinamide because it does work just as well. We then were like, okay, what are the main things that we want to address here? So we want to switch back on NAMPT. So we have several ingredients in there that do that. We have an ingredient called rutin, which contains an active called quercetin, which is an NAMPT activator. We also have alpha lipoic acid in there, which is also acting to induce, mimic the effect that you have when you're fasting, to again switch on that pathway. So we see increased levels of NAD salvage and recycling in the cells. We've also got ingredients in there to inhibit CD38, that inflammatory enzyme. So we've got apigenin in there in the form of parsley powder, which does that. I should probably point out we have a lot of actives that aren't put in their pure form, but in a more natural form. So things like parsley powder for apigenin, rutin instead of quercetin, and this is because they are much more bioavailable. It's fair enough putting pure active ingredients on cells and they work in cell culture, but when you try and take them orally, they don't do the same thing, and this is because they often get destroyed by the gut. So if you can put them in their more natural form, it protects them until they actually get to the cells. We also have inhibitors in there of a methylating enzyme, which we haven't spoke about, but quite often what happens in our cells as we get older is we get increased levels of methylation, which tries to also inhibit that recycling of NAD. So we have green tea in there, which contains EGCG, which also inhibits that enzyme. So, we like to talk of it as a multi-targeted approach. So every little thing that's going wrong in that NAD production network, we've got something in the product that's actually addressing it and trying to fix it.
Yeah, I think that's an amazing approach. First of all, also the fact that you are also trying to using nature in terms of, because at the end of the day, all the molecules, they are in nature, most of them.
Yeah.
And so I think it's great that you do that. And I think it's also really brave what you did in terms of turning your career upside down and just taking the leap. I think one of the amazing things about your product is that it's not just, yes, we created this, it works, but you actually have data that proves it, and not just a simple study, but it's a double-blind, placebo-controlled crossover study. So if you could maybe translate what this thing that I just said means for our viewers to make it more simple, and also, most importantly, to understand what this study actually showed.
So a placebo-controlled, double-blinded crossover study is what we performed, which is the gold standard in terms of clinical testing. So double-blinded basically just means that the researchers performing the test and the people analysing the data didn't know which was the real thing and which was the placebo. The fact that it was placebo-controlled, it's obvious what that does. It accounts for the placebo effect if someone knows they're taking something. The fact that it's a crossover study, what that means is that, so we had 28 people in the study, and rather than them being split into two groups of 14, where half of the people only ever took the placebo and half of them only ever took the real thing, which is very often what usually happens, the fact that it's a crossover meant that every single person took the placebo. They then had a washout phase, and then every single person took the real thing. And some people, that they were split in that some people ended up having the real thing first, then a washout, then the placebo, and the other people had the placebo first and then the real thing. So what it means is that everybody is their own control. So rather than taking a group of diverse, biologically diverse people and on the placebo, then a completely separate biologically diverse set of people on the real thing, and then comparing them, which isn't a very good comparison, you can literally take a person and be like, this is what happened to them on the placebo, this is what happened to them when they took the real thing, and it's the same human being. So it's a much better trial design, but also a bit trickier and longer to do. But yeah, so we wanted to do this. Clinical trials are not required for supplements, believe it or not.
Yeah, I know the supplement industry is very, there's a little bit of a gray area. And I think this is why, we are partnering up with Nuchido for this reason, because for our clients, we want to ensure that they get the latest and greatest backed by science products. And I think you also having the willingness to go in deep into this and be like, okay, I could just do a simple study, but actually want to do. And I guess this also stems from all of your background transition into your entrepreneurial journey.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's just so important. It's, you can develop a product, but, for me as a scientist, it's all about the data. What does the data show? How relevant is that data? The other thing about our clinical study is that we usually, for a clinical study in the NAD field, if you look at the trials on NR and NMN, they're all males age 55 to 65 years old, around that age bracket, which is not very reflective of the average population. So we actually used male and female, age 20 to 80. So again, that was a huge risk, because you would expect younger people not to have as low NAD and therefore not to see as big of a response. But we were like, this is something we're bringing out to a real, consumer mass market that, we want lots of different people to benefit from it. And we want to test what's gonna happen in the real world. So that was, another thing that's unusual about our trial, that we did that. But the things, we measured a number of different things. That the sort of primary outcome was, does this product actually boost NAD? And we found that after just 7 days of taking the product, it significantly increased NAD, and this continued to rise. We tested up to 28 days. But we're now doing some longer studies to see what happens on a longer term scale. So that was great that it did increase NAD. But the thing that we were really interested in was, are we actually fixing the root causes of NAD decline? And this is not just an effect of the precursors. So we actually measured levels of that key NAMPT enzyme and demonstrated that after 28 days supplementation, the levels of this enzyme were significantly increased in all the volunteers, obviously compared to placebo, which was nothing. We also wanted to look at, inflammation. We know that, an issue with some of the other precursors is that they're possibly driving inflammation. So we measured levels of inflammation in all the participants, and we saw a significant reduction in levels of inflammatory cytokines across the study period. We also looked at, is NAD activating the sirtuins? Because we know that a crucial part that NAD plays is in activating these longevity proteins. And again, we saw an increase in levels of the sirtuins. But I guess for me, probably what the most exciting thing was, the most exciting result was, we actually measured biological age. So there are tests now where you can actually look at the rate at which your cells are aging on the inside. And we measured biological age of all the participants, and before and after both the placebo and the supplement, and found that with the supplement, with Nichido Time Plus, we saw a reversal of biological age by 1.26 years, and that was in just 28 days. So for us, that was so exciting, because it showed that it really is having that impact on the cellular level to actually, at the end of the day, improve aging, which is what we're all about.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. And actually, while we're on it, if you're interested in trying the product, we actually have a code that you can use to get 20% off, which is Beyond Sapiens 20. You will find all the information in the link in the description. And so my last and final question, which it could be a whole rabbit hole, but I will try to keep it simple, is, what do you see for the future of longevity and also for Nuchido? Because now that I know a little bit more at the back end, I'm like, hey, I want to know what other products are in the making, because I want to get them.
Okay, so for Nuchido, I think, although I speak a lot about NAD, because that is the product that we're focusing on at the moment, we aren't just an NAD company. I specialize in aging in general, and there are many different things that contribute to the aging process. There's famously within our field something called the hallmarks of aging, which are 12 things that go wrong in our cells to cause the aging process, and we're researching on all of them, basically. But I think, in the near future, something that we are really focused on is looking at cellular senescence. We have things in the pipeline that we're looking to bring out to combat senescence. So senescent cells, very briefly, are cells that seem to become damaged with age. So our body puts them to sleep, and they sit taking up space in our bodies and not performing their function, but also start to secrete a lot of inflammation. And there's been a lot of studies to show that if you can remove these troublesome cells, or if you can stop them secreting the inflammation, then you can have a huge impact on health span. So we're really focused at the minute on looking at things that we can perhaps get to market that do that. So that's Nuchido. The second part of the question was like, where do I think the future is? I always forget how engrossed I am in this world. And, even like 10 years ago when I was working in drug development, developing drugs against aging, and I would like drop into a conversation, like someone would be like, what do you do? And I'm like, oh, I'm developing drugs to slow aging. And they'd be like, what? And I become so matter of fact about it because it's the world that I live in. And it's for me, it's like a given. It's like, in the future, aging in the way that it exists now will not exist in the future. And the average person finds it very hard to get the head around that, because as far as the average person's concerned, aging is something that's not very pleasant, but it's a natural thing that we can't do anything about. So it is just the way it is. But now the science really shows that it doesn't have to be like that. There's been huge breakthroughs, and I think as more people become educated on this, they do start to go, okay, maybe if I had better health for longer, I'd be open to thinking about aging in a different way. Because at the moment, people just think of aging as negative and a decline, and ending up in an awful state in a care home, unfortunately. But I think that in the future, the way that we think about cancer now will be the way that we think about aging. So 50 years ago, cancer was kind of considered as like what aging is. Like, it's this terrible thing, but you can't do anything about it. It's therefore bad luck, get on with it. Now, if anyone had that opinion towards cancer, there'd be outcry. It would be, no, what is the treatment? What can we do? Because it's known there's things that can be done about it. So I think in the future, people will think it's inhumane to let somebody get to the state where, they have Alzheimer's and a frailty and can't support or, live independently, because there are things that people are going to be able to do about it. So people will think, well, no, I'm not going to be like that, and I'm going to demand that there's things that can be done, because there will be. So that's where I think the future's going.
Yeah. And I'm not that much into the scientific part as much as you are, but I personally am trying to have more the holistic perspective also of different kind of technologies like AI or different kind of sensors that will be super small that we will have in our bodies, or whatever else, large language models, so on and so forth. And so I do think also that the future is bright. And I also think that we don't necessarily know yet what the future holds in terms of, I always say to people around me that it's like, hey, we don't really know how your future would look if you would start, I don't know, from when you're 30, 40, 50 or whatever, to do like all the right things to address all of the hallmarks of aging. We don't know. Because what we can see, yes, the blue zones are some examples, but still they're not doing like all the things that could be done. And as you say, most people are like, well, aging, I just will experience a slow decline and it will be terrible. But again, it doesn't have to be that way. And I think that is what individually with our companies and collectively as people in this industry, we are all trying to help other people with. And so, thank you so much, Dr. Nichola, for your time and expertise. Maybe before we go, if you could tell our viewers where they can find more about you, about Nuchido.
Yeah, absolutely. So to find out more about Nuchido, you can go to our website, which is www.nuchido.com. Nuchido spelled Nuchido. Also, we tend to do a lot on social media. There's, Nuchido's Instagram account is a great source of information on NAD and things like that. Or my Instagram account, which is just at Dr Nichola Conlon, where I talk about all aspects of aging. I try all sorts of different biohacking tests. So if anyone's interested in watching me do all sorts of experiments on myself, that's the place to go.
That's amazing. Awesome. So thank you so much for your time. We're maybe looking forward to having you in the future for other episodes like this, maybe on other products that are on the pipeline. And
perfect.
Yeah, best wishes and talk soon.
Thank you so much for having me.
I hope this video helped you gain a new level of understanding of NAD and cellular aging. If you'd like to try Nuchido Time Plus, remember that you can get 20% off by using our code BeyondSapiens20. Talking of which, Nuchido is one of our trusted partners for our longevity coaching, as we want to ensure our clients get access to the best products on the market. It's important to remember that we are all highly unique, and generic advice can only take you that far. So if you want an all-in-one solution for your health and longevity, I invite you to learn more about our longevity coaching program. It's a 3-month, one-on-one coaching program where you get a comprehensive, fully personalized coaching experience that includes your nutrition, exercise, sleep, and mindset. We also use state-of-the-art precision medicine testing to assess your gut microbiome and DNA sequencing, to discover your current state and predispositions related to diet, metabolism, organ function, and overall health. And then we use all that together with our multidisciplinary team of professionals to develop a holistic longevity plan to make you thrive. If you are curious to learn more about it, just check the link in the description or visit our website, beyondsapiens.co. While if you want to gain innovative ideas and solutions to optimize your health and longevity, then please subscribe to our channel so that you don't miss our daily science-based videos. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.